I'd just like to say thank you to you all for coming out, and we really appreciate the input. And just, again, we do have a website. I don't know if you can put that back up there, Brian. Just flip to that last slide. We'll put this presentation on the website as a PDF. Yeah, and you know, all this stuff is there. You know, you can take a look at it and you know, print it out if you like as well. Try to make the PDFs as small as possible. So, thanks for coming. My name is Mike Long. I'm with McFarland-Johnson. In the interest of full disclosure, I'm also a Goffstown resident. We're right up the hill here on Mountain Base Road. Carl Quirem is the Public Works Director. He's here as well. And Megan is here somewhere. Megan Terrio is the town engineer. And I have Brian Colburn is with me, and Scott Filetto is here as well. And we got a little presentation that I'm going to run through. And what I'd ask of you is to just hold questions till the end. I'm going to be talking about two different locations, which is a little bit difficult. And I'm going to talk about Pleasant Street first, and then go on to High and Elm Street. So I know I'm hoping this will take me like a half an hour because I'm going to buzz through pretty quick. But, you know, so if you have paper or something, just write down your questions. We're here to answer them, and I'll get going. So, go past that one. And here's the agenda for tonight. We're going to do a project overview. I'll do a little bit of background and, you know, what we're doing here, how we got to this point. Talk about the purpose and need, some of the cultural, natural resources, which aren't a lot on this project except for historical. And then talk a little bit about traffic and alternatives, which is what you see up here. And then we'll go to questions. So, first off, this is the High and Elm Street project. And just buzz right through this one, Brian. And then Pleasant Street. So these are the aerial photos as you see here. Previous studies. There's been a number of things that have been done over the years here. Way back in the 70s, people started looking at High and Elm Street. Pleasant Street not so much until a little bit later, but High and Elm Street especially had some studies done. There was even a bypass option considered. New Hampshire DOT did that a long time ago. That was kind of thrown out. The two alternatives that you see over here in yellow, those were actually dug out of the New Hampshire DOT archives. Back in 1998, the town actually asked them to look at a couple of options, see what they could do here at High and Elm Street. And I'll talk about those a little bit more as we go on. There was a corridor management plan in 2003. Pleasant Street traffic study, that's what our firm did. We did that as part of a study to look at Wallace Road and Pleasant Street. And that's where we ended up with the Wallace Road roundabout. Pleasant Street was put on hold for a little bit longer. It wasn't the funds to do it, so you know, that's how we got it restarted here. And then the Village Planning Committee actually looked at the Mass Road all the way through the village. And there's some good information. That's actually online. A number of these things are actually online, but that one especially is online on the town website, so you can take a look at that if you'd like. So where are we? Carl and Megan worked to get funding for Pleasant Street and actually to make some changes at High and Elm as well. Trying to take the work that we had done previously on Pleasant Street, push that forward, using a funding source called CMAQ. That's short for Congestion Mitigation and Air Quality. And what it is, it's funding that's available to try to make changes in spot locations where you can make an improvement, either to help pedestrians move. There's actually a long list of things that you can do to help a particular location. One of the big issues is air quality, although that's not such a big issue here. But in general, you can use it for a lot of different ways, and it's a pretty good funding source. The thing is, in this case, it's a competitive environment. The state actually has a process that you go through, and they actually select the best projects. And this project was selected, was actually number 2, I think, on the list that year. And so where are we? Well, we're in the conceptual design phase. That's where we are right now, and we're trying to complete that by August. Now, we're still, because we came up with so many alternatives, which I'll go through, there's a little bit more work to do, so we may actually miss that by a little bit. But ideally, we'll get something to final design and get it bid next spring so that we can construct next summer, and that would be the final, summer into fall. Ideally, we would be doing, especially like Pleasant Street and even High and Elm, we want to do that when the traffic is least, which is like July and August through town here. So. Here's the funding. Again, this was CMAQ money. The total funding is $819,000. That comes from New Hampshire DOT, but it is a federal, it's like a pass-through. I guess is the best way to describe it. The town actually got points for putting more money into the project, 45%. That's unusual, but you get additional credit. That helped to make the project win, that the money would come forward. And that was the split, but there's some, we can fool with that a little bit, I guess is the best way to put it. We've been working with the steering committee. We've had 3 meetings, and that steering committee is composed of the people you see here. Some of those people are here tonight, and they're going to comment, help describe what their thoughts were on the alternatives that we looked at. Okay, so just a little more background. The Pleasant Street, we had a listening session May 21st. You can see some of the major concerns that were identified. I mean, driveways, the layout, all that having to do with pedestrians. It's difficult to pull out, especially in the morning. So those are the issues that were identified. And then High and Elm, same types of things. I mean, I think most of you know what's going on here, so I'm not going to dwell on this, but it's pretty obvious some of the issues. And I should mention that the High and Elm Street has met signal warrants, which means there's a certain amount of cars going through there. Met warrants for a signal back in 1987, I think it was, and that's a long time without trying to solve the problem. So what's the first thing we do? Steering committee, we get together and we decide, what are we doing here? What's the point of this project? We develop what's called a purpose and need, and I'm not going to read this off to you, but basically the most important thing to understand about this is that we're trying to improve safety and traffic flow, okay? Now, those two are probably at odds a little bit in this particular location, these two locations. But that's the idea, but with a caveat. And the caveat is that we don't want to ruin the character of Goffstown. It's pretty important to everybody that we keep the village character. It's a nice town. I mean, I like living here. It's a pretty good place, and a lot of old buildings and things like that. So we want to try to preserve that as much as we can, but we still want to move traffic. We still want to make it safe. Just a little bit about environmental resources, and this isn't showing up too well, but there's the historic resources are really the only critical thing to work through here. The point of talking about this at all is the fact that as part of the federal process, we have to make sure that we look at things like wetlands, hazardous materials, historical, archaeological, a number of things like that. Noise and air, for instance. We don't want to have impacts to the environment on this project. At least we want to minimize impacts to the environment for any project that we do under the federal regulations. So in this case, pretty simple projects, really. We're trying to maintain, in the footprint, but one of the things that's really important is especially the High and Elm Street area, that's within a historic district. That's a registered historic district identified, back in the 90s. Actually, as part of the New Hampshire DOT study, they did a lot of work to identify historic buildings within that district. And so as a group, it's a significant historical area. The library, the 2 churches, those are really significant buildings. So we have to, any project that we have to do, especially at High and Elm, has to take those things into account. And if we stay within the footprint, it's probably pretty easy to get the project permitted. And in fact, we have a meeting tomorrow morning to go before them and kind of describe what we're looking at. So I don't think it'll be an issue here unless we start relocating the library, which is one of the alternatives that you see here. Okay, traffic analysis. I'm just going to talk a little bit about this. I don't want to get all bogged down in the most important thing to say here is that there's too many cars. There's too many cars going through Goffstown. In the morning, they're coming from Ware, New Boston area. People are going to work in Manchester. There's somewhere in the order of 1,000 cars in the peak hour in that direction, you know, in the eastbound direction. Same movements reverse in the evening. And in general, your PM peak hour is higher than your AM peak hour, almost without exception every day. That's a lot of cars for a single lane roadway. And what I'm going to show you here are these alternatives. None of these alternatives can really handle that traffic at these spot locations. Okay, as long as those cars are just flowing along a one-lane road without intersections, cross traffic, 1,000 cars is actually pretty easily handled. They keep moving. They'll be in platoons. You'll have, you know, one guy will be holding things up, and you'll move maybe a little slower, but the traffic will keep moving. It's once you get cross traffic getting into the situation, like you have at Wallace Road. We created the roundabout there, and the roundabout works pretty well, especially in off-peak hours, but you do get a fairly long queue in the morning, people coming from the east going to Manchester. The queue is actually about half of what it was, though, before the roundabout went in. And now you're getting a queue from the people coming from Manchester. So they're getting slowed up because people coming into the roundabout now have a way to get into traffic. They don't have to just sit at a stop sign and wait. So they're taking, as I like to say, they're taking green time away from the folks that are coming from Manchester. So they're going to queue up a little bit coming from Manchester. So we've introduced, that's kind of an indication of what's going on. We've introduced a traffic control device. A roundabout could have been a signal. Chose to do a roundabout, and that makes things more difficult for the through traffic. So that's what you're going to see when I talk about all the alternatives here. What's happened is anything we can do here, short of putting in two through lanes in each direction, isn't going to work optimally. It's still going to be a problem, and it's going to force people to queue up. Fairly long queues is what we've been calculating. So, bottom line is, we don't have, you know, and as I go forward I'll show you that, but we don't have a perfect solution here. Just a little bit of again, background. This is High and Elm Street. The existing is level of service F. Obviously, what we do is we take the traffic and we increase it by a percentage. In this case, we use 1%, which is a very conservative growth rate. We were seeing growth rates much higher than that for the years up to about 2005, 2006. Things have tapered off quite a bit since then. And they've basically gone down a little bit, and now they're starting to rise again. But we're basically in the same place we were probably about 5 years ago. Call it from the economy, whatever. Everybody likes to blame the economy. I'm not sure exactly what the reason is, but the situation is traffic numbers have stagnated a little bit. Actually gone down slightly from what we had back when we did the original study in 2006. So, crashes. High and Elm Street, it's a little bit difficult to determine how many crashes are in these two particular locations. The police have a program that they use. It's only as good as the data in. Basically what we were seeing is in the area of High and Elm Street, and it could be somebody pulling out of the bank, somebody coming out of one of the other driveways. It could have been an accident there. It's not necessarily true that 28 crashes happened at High or Elm Street, but it's generally in that vicinity. 28 crashes in the last 5 years. There was only one pedestrian incident. They actually didn't note if that pedestrian was injured or not. I assumed that he might have been, but there was a pedestrian incident. But there was actually only one injury crash noted in the data. So even though it's a tough situation, and I drive through there every day because I work in Concord, we're not really identifying a lot of crashes there. Going to the other one. Pleasant Street, same kind of thing. Almost the exact same kind of situation. 27 crashes, 5 years. No pedestrian incidents there. 1 injury crash. So, what are the alternatives? And maybe I'll just back up a minute here. Pleasant Street, one of the things that we looked at as a committee, the committee, as we started to go into it a little more, they started identifying some other things, and it actually came up in the listening session as well. We weren't just looking at Pleasant. We actually took maybe some time, I guess, to look at Union a little bit, East and West Union, especially the crosswalk that's located across Mass Road. And we also had some talk about Mountain Road. Now, what we tried to do, though, our task was to focus on Pleasant Street, but you'll see on some of these alternatives that they actually try to address the issues a little bit at Union Street especially. The first alternative here is a traffic signal. Pretty basic layout, left turn in the northbound, a right turn in the southbound, and basically keeping 1 lane off of Pleasant Street. This works. I shouldn't say it works. It addresses the issues, it gets people out of Pleasant Street, but it takes time away from the through traffic. And that's a problem. We get some long queues. And hopefully you've taken a look at the board here. I should back up for a second. All of these figures that you see here are on the website, so that you can download them as PDFs and take a look at them. One of the things you'll notice here, for instance, on the Pleasant Street, we have levels of service, but we also have queue lengths. And you'll see here on one of these, on the traffic signal, for instance, we get a queue of 33 cars on the southbound Main Street. And that's during the AM. So we're getting a big queue. We're letting people out of Pleasant Street because there's a lot of guys coming out there in the AM. But they're queuing up on Main Street. That's people, coming from the north and heading south. They're going to queue up because we're giving time, again, we're giving green time to Pleasant Street folks. You can see some of the key characteristics here. One of the things that, again, we're trying to follow that purpose and need. And so, does the signal fit the character of what we want at this intersection? The committee didn't think so. And so that was identified. It does work. I mean, signals are, everybody understands them. Generally, green means go, red means stop. So, basically, but you're still getting long queues just because of the volume of traffic. The next alternative we looked at was the roundabout. And again, same kind of a situation. The roundabouts are probably the safest intersection option that you can do. What we're finding, though, is that in the United States, people don't drive them as aggressively as maybe they should at times. It might make me sound a little funny, but the fact is, roundabouts are more prevalent, have been around for a very long time in Europe, especially Britain, Australia, New Zealand. People are more used to them. As people get more accustomed to driving them, they'll probably drive them better than they do now. But at this time, based on how they are operating, and I see it down here at Wallace Road, they don't work as well as maybe they do in other countries. And so the volume of cars that we get through them probably isn't as good as it should be. And so consequently, the way we have to model it right now, and we run everything through a computer model to try to get the answer on how well is this thing going to go. They're not working as well as we'd like them to. So does the signal work a little better in this situation? Yes. We're getting actually longer queues in our modeling with the roundabout than we are at the signal. Now, the good thing is about roundabouts is that they're very safe for pedestrians and they're really safe for cars, except that, let's go back for a minute, we weren't seeing a lot of crashes here in the first place. So are we fixing a problem that doesn't exist? Maybe. So again, looking at it, it's probably a pretty good solution, but is it the best solution for this location? Just go to the key characteristics here. Again, just trying to talk a little bit about what we're doing. One of the things maybe I'd point out about roundabouts is that they operate, once you go off peak, where you have less cars, this will operate maybe a little better than the signal. The signal will always be on. It'll stop you when you just come out and there's nobody around, and, whereas a roundabout you can go. The other thing is about a roundabout versus a signal, maintenance costs are less for the roundabout. You've got to pay to operate the signal day after day. The other thing is during a power failure, the roundabout will continue to operate. Now, maybe I'll just back up a little bit. The chief, fire chief, isn't that crazy about roundabouts, because when he has to go to a call, a traffic signal allows him to use his preempt, it's called the preempt button, allows him to make the signal go the way he's going. So he feels like he can get through them a little quicker than with a roundabout. So there's pluses and minuses. So having said all that, we're still getting awfully long queues when we do the modeling. So that caused us to look at the third option, which is basically a modification of the existing intersection. What we did was we looked at some of the issues, which we have the issues map right here. One of the issues was people going to the wrong side. They're coming from the north and they get on the wrong side of the island. They make turns around the center island there in kind of strange ways. And so what we've tried to do is we've tried to channelize things a little better. We would, you can see we've expanded, the size of the islands. It kind of looks like a roundabout, but it wouldn't operate like a roundabout. We would keep traffic moving on the through movements on Mass Road. So it's not going to help as much with people coming out of Pleasant Street, but it will channelize people a little better. We're hopeful that it would slow them down. And maybe just to cut to the chase, this is the alternative that the committee felt was the best way to go. And it's kind of it's a compromise solution, there's no doubt about it, but it keeps traffic moving on Mass Road, but it also incorporates some of the elements of a roundabout, albeit we're not using the yield on entry, which is consistent with a roundabout. We're still going to maintain, you'll pull into that center and then you basically stop to cross the other direction of traffic. So, bottom line is, we can do some things with this that are similar to a roundabout, but we also keep the traffic moving as well. One of the other things we've done, though, is we've shown the crosswalk. We would hopefully get rid of the crosswalk at Union across Mass Road, and we would move it over. And it could be there, it could be moved up a little bit. It's almost like a mid-block, but it'd definitely be safer, we feel, because it's getting it away from the sight distance issue that you have coming up around the corner. It's hard to see someone in the crosswalk there. So if we move the crosswalk back, we'll sign it a little better. It also makes you cross just one direction of traffic at a time. So we felt that was kind of a compromise solution, but we feel like maybe that makes it safer than it is, a lot safer. So again, maybe go to the next slide there, Brian. Here's some of the characteristics. Again, it's a compromise solution, but I can tell you the committee, and I'll let them speak for themselves as well, but the committee put a lot of thought into this. We tried to present all the facts and figures and things, and they felt that this would be the best solution. Even though it's not quite the best solution, it's the best solution for this location at this time. And again, this is the summary. I'm going to actually put this presentation on the website as well, so you'll be able to see that too. But again, this is a figure that's on the website, and I'll actually have the website on there. So at the end. All right, let's move on to the next one. And sorry? Oh yeah, sure, I can do that. The prices are traffic signal. We have 450,000, which means the town share is about 222. The roundabout is 490, and the with 243 is the town share, and then 230 is the no build. And we're probably going to stop calling it the no build because there is build there. We'll just say, you know, modification to the existing or something like that. No build is kind of a term that we use. You know, we're trying to make minor modifications. This has turned into more than a minor modification, I should say.
I have one question on the considerations. Did the committee talk about a consideration of the other intersection for the traffic signal roundabout no build, i.e., if you had a traffic light at Pleasant, what impact would that have on Elm, High, and Main, and vice versa? Because we talked about queuing.
Yeah, again, I'd ask you to wait till the end, but I'll just answer that one real quickly. The queues are pretty long on any of the roundabout or signal options. Do they back up clear to the other intersection? Probably not for the signal at Pleasant, but you know, between the two of them, there's some distance, but it's going to back up. For instance, Pleasant Street, my sense is that distance takes you across the bridge.
I'll wait till.
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely some long queues.
I was going the other way with it, but I'll ask.
Yeah. All right, let's keep moving, Brian. Okay, so what do we have for options here? We have a number of options. These are all the ones for High and Elm Street. Basically, you're going to see, I'll start off with this one, which is basically just to install a traffic signal at the existing location. Now, what we would do is it'd basically be one signal that would control both High and Elm Street. It would have like 3 phases. And what it would do is it would allow, because of the convoluted nature of this thing and how far apart the intersections are, it would have to run, basically let people out of Elm Street, let people out of High Street, and then let people go on North Mass and Main. That's a pretty simplistic statement about it, but the bottom line is, it'd be a pretty long cycle to get everything to work, at least in some way, shape, or form. So it's a little bit difficult to model. What we've shown is, this is actually the traffic calming option. I haven't tried to draw up a different option for this because basically all we're doing is we're saying, okay, we're going to leave this, basically the lane configurations pretty much the way they are now. You'll see these other 2 New Hampshire DOT ones. I'll talk about those. They do some different things there, and we were able to look at what they did in the past, and you know, it's somewhat different, but basically we're just taking this and running it the way it is. Go to the characteristics for that. What it does is, you know, if you have the signals in there, you're going to be able to control, you can put a pedestrian phase in. Now, you know, you can stop all traffic. You know, over Manchester, for instance, if you're on Elm Street, some of the pedestrian phases are, you know, you just stop. Everybody stops. All traffic stops and you walk. And you could do something like that here. But if somebody pushes a button, if you're running it that way during the peak hour, it's gonna really slow people down. You're gonna get some really long queues with that. The bottom line is, though, with a signal, you have a way to push the button and cross, regardless of how you run it, whether it's concurrent with, you know, a movement, you know, a vehicle movement or whatever. But you can do that with a signal. So that's kind of cool. But once again, the committee felt that a signal didn't really fit within the context of the historic district of Goffstown. So this is a I don't want to even call it a reasonable alternative. You're going to get long queues with this one as well. That's what you're going to see with all of these. You know, I keep saying that, but Bottom line is there's too many cars on Mass Road. You have the added wrinkle, though. There's a lot of people in the PM that are coming out of Elm Street. There's almost 500 cars coming out of Elm Street. It's half the volume that you're seeing on North Mass and Main is also coming out of Elm Street. So that's a lot of volume. So we looked at roundabouts. And I know a lot of people chuckled when they first saw this one because, you know, we basically put the roundabout right on top of the library. The idea would be that the library would be relocated. We actually have two alternatives. Go to the next one, Brian. We have an oval, some people say oval about, and then go back to the other one. And this is a roundabout with bypass lanes. Again, because of the heavy volumes we have, they don't work. They'll work in the off-peak, but when you get to the peak hours, you get very long queues. A single lane roundabout just doesn't have enough volume. Even by the rules of thumb, we wrestled with this quite a bit, trying to find a way to get these things to work. There's some general rules of thumb about how much volume you have on roundabouts, or can have. It all comes down to conflict in movements, and if you have too much conflict between the movements, they just don't work very well. And that's what we have here. There's just too much volume on North Mass and Main. So what we did, though, was we looked at this and said, well, okay, if we were going to do something, what would it look like? And these were the options that we came up with. And one thing we tried to do is with this option is we took a look at what land was available, and we realized that the library has land. There's talk about expanding the library. We thought this would be an opportunity to maybe do that. And so we just, again, it's what I like to call a crayon. It's not necessarily what we would do. The committee thought that we should take a look at it, so we did. Go to the next one, Brian. And there's the oval about, basically the same thing. You would have some other impacts. You can see where the popcorn stand is. That's, would have to be relocated. We even get into the bank parking lot a little bit with this one. And then, again, just the same kind of, here's what's going on. And this is also the highest cost alternative by a long shot because of the relocation of the library. So go to the next one, Brian. Okay, back to the traffic comment. This is actually the alternative that the committee chose as the best of all the options. Now, is it the best solution for all time? Probably not, but it addresses some of the issues, okay? It gives, you can see the crosswalks become shorter. One of the things that we have a problem with down here, and again, just from driving it, there's a lot of near misses, I think, with pedestrians down here. I think we've been lucky to only have one pedestrian crash that was identified. It's hard to cross it. And one of the things that we try to do with this is look for ways to put some islands in, shorten up the crosswalks, give a little bit of refuge. Now, here's kind of the compromise. The islands that you see there would be raised slightly. They'd be kind of like the aprons that you see out here at the roundabouts. Those are raised about 1.5 inches. Now, that's not a whole lot of protection. I'll tell you for a fact, though, that the traffic islands that you see where you have a curb, a 6-inch curb, those aren't all that much protection either. I mean, they feel safer. I know I've walked in a lot of, been out on a lot of roads, and it feels a little bit safer, but in reality, the car actually, is out of control or whatever. It's not a whole lot of protection. But what this does, even with just a little bit of raise, and what we're looking at here is maybe we would delineate the crosswalk somehow. We could do some kind of, colored concrete or some other treatment to make it very clear to the drivers, that this is a crosswalk and that you've got to be aware. We're hopeful also, what we've tried to do with this is we've tried to narrow up the whole roadway, provide some sidewalks on each side, make it so it feels more confined. what we found, in general, if you confine the driver a little bit, you make the driver feel like he's confined, he's going to slow down. You've also got the deflection of the curve through here. That makes a difference as well. What we see, if you go out here and observe for a while, and I'm sure many of you have, especially people coming from the west, they're in quite a hurry coming into town. Once they get to the curve, tend to slow down a little bit. Some less than others, for sure. But in general, if we can make it so that they feel more confined, put some stuff in the median, some things like that, we can, slow people down, we hope. Again, this is a compromise solution, and maybe not the entire solution for, the rest of the time. But at least at this point, we can do this relatively cheaply, but we can also make a difference, I think, with, especially for pedestrian safety. Would this operate really any differently than it does now? Not a whole lot. Now, the other thing I should mention, though, is why wouldn't we just do a raised island? Put the 6-inch island in. And the reason is because of truck traffic. There's a number of trucks that want to make the movements. The worst movement is obviously to go from 114 up to 13. There's not a lot of trucks doing that. But we still have to provide provision for it. Those are state routes. We need to have that ability for a large truck to make that turn. And you'd be amazed how large the radius is for some of these trucks. We also need to have them be able to make the move from 114 onto Elm Street, Goffstown back road. So there's movements there that have to happen. It'd be nice if we could raise those islands, be a little bit more refuge for pedestrians. But if we're going to maintain traffic for trucks, without impacting the other properties, the library property, the houses on the southeast there, or southwest, we only have so much room. We're trying to keep things tight. It's almost like we're working at cross purposes, trying to make it tight so we slow people down, but on the other hand, we got to have trucks getting through. So it's a compromise solution. And here's, again, key characteristics. One thing I should mention is we've actually shown a little something there with the Sully's parking lot. Another way sometimes to slow people down, plus the way the Sully's lot is right in front of the building, it's kind of a free-for-all. There's no place there for the sidewalk. It really isn't any sidewalk. It's just people pulling in, coming out. What we've tried to do is redefine their lot a little better and provide some parking. Now you say, well, geez, I wouldn't want to back out of those parking spaces. And I guess I would be a little, gun shy of that as well. But the fact is, once people get to know that people would be parking there, it'd probably slow them down coming around the corner, especially going to the west. When stuff is happening, people get used to it. Now, would there be some accidents because of that? Might be. But it does make things a little bit safer at Sully's, I think, overall. And, you can debate that a little bit for sure. But it definitely would clean things up in front of there. It is a little difficult at times. People are kind of going willy-nilly. And again, this was the selection of the steering committee. Go on, Brian. I just want to touch on some of the other options we looked at. We kind of looked everywhere for a good solution here. So I'm going to go through these fairly quickly because I want to kind of wrap this up. This was a mini roundabout solution. Minis are in use especially in England. I actually went to a nice seminar on minis out in Indiana. They use them quite a bit out there. People are used to them. It's amazing when you watch videos of these things. If you want to go online, there's plenty of mini roundabout videos online. But bottom line is, this would be just like Wallace Road, except they're smaller. They're much smaller in diameter. The inner portions there, where you see it's kind of black on the screen there, that would all be cobbled, just like the truck apron out here at Wallace Road. The entire, roundabout center would be cobbled, and that's to allow large trucks to just turn right over that thing. So, because this wasn't selected, if you want to talk to me about minis, you can talk to me afterwards, but I'm not going to go into a lot of detail. I actually like this solution. I'd love to be able to try it, but I just can't say that it's even close to working because of the volumes that we have. And What it does, though, is just, as you can see, is it minimizes impacts, and that's why people use minis. The other reason I'm a little reluctant to go this way is because there's only about a dozen of these in the United States at this time. People aren't used to them. So you can see some of the basically pluses and minuses there. And let's go on to the next one. This was the option, or one of the options that was identified as part of the village study. And this was to look at basically a normal size roundabout and reconfiguration of Elm Street. The key element of this one is that people coming out of Elm Street, whether you're going left or right, would go to the west and use the roundabout to reverse direction. Basically, this has the same issues as all the other options in that it can't handle the traffic. There's too much. But it's not a bad solution in terms of the footprint. There'd be a little impact to the bank, possibly a little bit to the library, and it definitely makes us relocate the popcorn stand. So it's not a horrible solution in terms of the footprint, but again, it has the same issue where it doesn't really handle the traffic the way it needs to, the way we'd like it to, just because it's too much. And again, you can see what it is. One thing I should mention is the roundabouts actually fit the village character. And that's something that they really do well, because you have these green areas and sidewalks and so forth. That's kind of cool. But again, if it's not moving the traffic the way we want to, that's not a good thing. Okay, and I'll just touch briefly on these. Again, 1998, the DOT was asked by the town to come in and look at High and Elm Street. They did counts, they did, looked at the right-of-way. I mean, they actually did a lot of work on the historical resources, and did a lot of nice work. And what they came up with is these two solutions. This was called the 3-lane solution, and you can see there's a left turn lane, coming from the west and to both High and Elm Street. This would be signalized. It worked reasonably well with the existing traffic, but it had impacts to parking. I should mention that a number of the options have various impacts to parking. The minis less so, the big roundabouts more so. These two options for the DOT, the 3- and 4-lane options, this one impacts traffic, or impacts parking a lot. The other one basically wipes out all the parking with the 4-lane option. But you can see that what's going on here, you've got left and right turns out of Pleasant and Elm. Again, it worked reasonably well with the existing traffic, but once you start growing the traffic, it doesn't work very well anymore. And the big issue, and this is why it was never pursued, is once the town saw what the impacts would be from these 3- and 4-lane options, they said, no, this isn't what we want our town to look like. And so they said, thank you very much, appreciate your efforts, and we'll have to think about this some more. And that's why it stopped at that time. Again, the 4-lane option, even more impacts. You can see what maybe you didn't notice there was some shoulders on the 3-lane option. On this option, there's basically no shoulders. You're running the traffic right up against the curb line in both directions. One thing I should mention with any traffic signal option, because of the nature of the intersections where they're spread apart, it would probably be somewhat easy to get vehicles trapped in here. Now, that may be a little hard to visualize, but the bottom line is you have to leave time. Basically, you would leave all red time once you shut this down. In other words, you'd have people running the signal, and maybe they don't run it that quickly, so then they get out in here and they say, well, should I keep going or should I stop? Or, so with a signal like this where it's split, where the heads are by that much distance, you tend to get some issues, and that's one of the reasons that the signal isn't all that great an option either. And again, here's the alternatives, and as before, I'll try to read them off here. In fact, I'll use this thing. The traffic signal, we came up with a price of about $380,000, and that's without any additional lanes. The single roundabout, we had $1.1 million, and that included an estimate, just an estimate, of the cost to relocate the library. The traffic calming option, we got about $150,000 for the construction costs. Actually, I should read the total. 165 is, with inspection and so forth. That would have a town share of about 74,000 with the 45%. The mini roundabouts is about 670. It's about the same for the roundabout where we just have High Street, that one right there. Just a single roundabout at High. And then the New Hampshire DOT 3 and 4 lane, they had actually had some decent numbers on those from before. We kind of escalated a little bit for inflation over the years. And those are, come in at 780 and about 840. So those are the prices that we have. Now, some of those are much higher than the amount that we have budgeted. So that's a consideration as well. And I should mention that this comes through a program called the Municipally Managed Program in New Hampshire. New Hampshire DOT is called LPA, which I can't remember the acronym exactly, but the bottom line is they have found money at times when your project goes over. You have to go talk to them and talk it through, but no guarantees. And especially in this political climate, we've had trouble passing the gas tax. So they got rid of the $45 registration fee and so forth. Some of that money paid for municipal projects, and so there's not that much is available, or not as much as before. So that's been an issue as well. So let's go to the next one, Brian. Okay, so when we had the committee meetings, we said, well, okay, none of these options is really optimum. Is there something else we can do? And we have we gave Carl a scope of work and a fee that was based on that and so forth. Well, we were probably already outside the boundaries of our scope here. But one of the things that came up as part of the committee meetings was, what about a one-way loop? And I know this was mentioned in the union leader, so I'll just speak to it a little bit. And Carl might want to say a little bit more, but basically it would take South Mass Road and Main Street and make that a two-lane roadway in one direction. You would basically take that and run that to the west. And then somehow you would find a way to bring the eastbound traffic, and you would probably come out at Depot Street. How you would get there is anyone's guess. There's a number of ways you could maybe do that. But you would basically run that through. That's not within our current scope, but we're going to actually go with Carl to talk to New Hampshire DOT and see if we can maybe get a little bit of money to look at that, or at least get permission even, because that's outside the scope of what was presented to the CMAQ committee, the people that choose which projects to go forward. So I don't know if you want to add anything to that, Carl, or not.
As Mike mentioned, I did have a conversation with DOT about expanding the scope, and unfortunately with summer vacations it's been difficult to get all the people that need to be involved in that discussion in the room at the same time. But what the thought was, and what we approached DOT, given everything Mike just talked about, probably the preferred solution if we had to make a choice to solve the problem is talk seriously about move the library, which is the most expensive option that we're looking at. The rough calculations that McFarland-Johnson did to look at the one-way loop had promise. We didn't have enough detailed information to really assess it, but it had promise. So the discussion with DOT, and by the way, DOT is the meat and the sandwich. We go talk to DOT, but really it's federal highway any changes to anything that we're doing has to be ultimately approved by federal highway. So there's a process we have to follow. So we are going to go up and make our pitch. They'll see everything that we just laid out here, and basically we're going to ask them to expand our scope of design consideration and options consideration to let us kind of take a look at this one-way loop, and then we can make a definite decision on what the best alternative is. So that's yet to be determined. Our meeting will be the end of next week to just sit down and talk to them about whether or not we can get the scope expanded. It would be nice if we could have the answer to that, but we don't.
Good, thanks, Carl. Go to the next one, Brian.
Excuse me, sir. Would there be a way to find out when that meeting would be, and could a New Hampshire legislator attend that meeting as well?
Could, I guess, but I mean, you could, but I think that's a bit premature in my own, at least in my opinion. I would say, you know, we work with DOT all the time, and a lot of times you have, I guess I'll use the word spitballing, just to say, hey, what can be done, what can we do, and so forth and so on. Once you see what the options are, then I would say, yeah, then that's something where you know, a legislator or somebody could you know, weigh in and say, hey, you know, this is something that would be good, or you know, at this point I think we're still trying to figure out, well, what's possible. You know, Carl's had a preliminary discussion with Bob Hudson, who's our liaison with New Hampshire DOT. You know, so I think it's a discussion that, you know, could be. I'm not saying you can't, but it's one of those things where you try to just see what's available. You know, what could be done. Hold on just one second. I'm almost to the end here. These are the next steps. Gather comments from tonight's meeting. Once we kind of got a little bit of a wrinkle here because, you know, maybe we're going to expand the scope, maybe not. We'll see how that goes. But then what would happen is once we get figured out where we are, then it's up to the select board. The final decision is the select board will make the decision on what are the options and how and where we go forward. These are what I would call crayon drawings. Once we get the decision from the select board on which is the preferred alternative, then we would go to final design, and then we would try to work out some of the details of these options. And once to get to final design, we have to submit a design report to New Hampshire DOT. That's not a really hard thing to do. You put together the information you have, put together your conceptual drawings, and you say, okay, here's what we got, and you go forward and you present that to them. And then you begin final design, and then the idea would be that we would develop final construction drawings so that something, whatever is agreed to, would be constructed next summer. Ideally, you know, July, August timeframe is when, you know, the real guts of the work would occur, so you're doing it when there's less traffic. July and August are definitely a slowdown in traffic. So that's where we're going. Go to the next one, Brian. And now it's time for you guys to talk. And you know, this is our contact information. You know, Megan is who we're working for. Carl's Public Works Director. But Megan's, you know, the one we talk to on a daily basis. That's my contact information. And then there's the website information as well. And so, like I said, all these things are on PDF on the website. So, I'm going to let you run around. They've asked us to use the microphone to ask questions, and so I'm going to have Scott here run it back up to you.
My name's Russ Laria. I live on 12 Elm Street. Lived in this town now for 64 years. Lived on Elm Street for the past 35. And I think the loop, one-way loop deal is kind of ridiculous. I think a traffic light is the main option that the town should put there. The aesthetic of the town has changed over the years. As far as historic look, when they tore the park, Common apart, ripped out all the trees, they ruined the town there. Putting up the new Cumberland Farms gas station isn't historic looking. Ace Hardware is not a historic looking building. It's 2013. I think it's time we have a traffic light there. Take a look, go over on Hughes Road, look at that intersection there with Weston Road, Mooresville Road, Hughes Road. There's quite a distance in between there, like what we got. Traffic works fine there during school rush hour and everything else. And during the non-rush hour, nighttime, you wouldn't have to have the lights working. You could have them take and go for yellow for the 114 and Main Street and red for Elm Street and High. And I think, take out part of the bricks there along the park, where the cars park, and those bump outs that we didn't ask for. We had asked for a traffic light years ago by the voters, and we got the bump outs. You could have a right-hand turn going from Mass Road down onto Elm Street. And on the other side of the street there, where the beauty shop is and Pachucci's painting studio is, get rid of that bump out, and the cars be able to flow through there easy too. But to take and widen the streets and everything else, you're going to just ruin more of the town's look. One traffic light sure in the heck isn't going to ruin this town. And Penoble's got one at every intersection you come to. And one here in town sure isn't going to hurt it. You know, take and make the traffic flow a lot easier and people get out at the corner a lot better than what they do now. That's all I got to say. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Excuse me.
I want to say I agree with the gentleman that just spoke, because I live in Penardville, and my street's Joffrey Street. My street's gotten very busy since Rite Aid went in and the car wash. Now I can actually get out of my street because there's a traffic light on my street. And just to make a comment, long time ago, we used to have a lot of historic value in Penardville. Okay, we used to be farms, and that's all gone. But anyhow, the lights do work better.
Hi, Mike. I had a question about the impacts of signalization, not in the areas that you're talking about. What impact would it have if we signalized coming eastbound, say where the cemetery is? Because in the morning, Elm Street is a difficult left-hand turn, a lot of traffic there. You're looking for breaks in traffic. And if you signalized out that direction for the people coming in, say from Ware and west of here, it would give you some of those cues to get out. And the example that I give is if you look at Tatro Drive, it's a great example. Sometimes you have to wait to make a left-hand turn to go to the village, but you get a break when the light changes at the Irving oil station. So that was the question that I had for the Pleasant intersection as well. If you signalized out by the, say the cemetery, that mobile station is, for that traffic, and even if it queued up 30 cars, it's in front of the cemetery, it's not going to really be bothering many people. And then if you did signalize that Pleasant Street intersection, you're going to give the opportunity through queuing, and gaps, I should say, the gaps to allow these movements, which don't exist now because the traffic is coming constantly. So did you factor that into the equation? One, signals outside of, say, the area that we're talking about, and two, on the Pleasant Street one, if there was a signal there, what impact would that have on Elm, Main, and High?
Thank you, guys. That's a good question. The first thing I'd say, though, is we're really not allowed to put a signal in. What you're actually talking about is something akin to ramp metering, which is, I won't go into some long discussion, but basically there's some places, and it hasn't been that prevalent in the Northeast, but they've used it, for instance, there's a lot of these out west, Denver, Phoenix, and so forth, the interstate cannot be expanded. And so what they do is they put a signal on the ramp as you get to the entrance to the ramp, and they say, okay, you can't go. They just put a stoplight there. And basically the signal works as a meter to allow traffic to get onto the interstate at a slower rate. That's kind of what you're talking about a little bit, because you're saying, it's just as you said, there's a lot of people, for instance, in the morning, they're coming in there. You know, if you were to put a signal out at the west end of town, you would definitely create gaps, would allow people to get into traffic, because you would platoon, you would control the traffic coming from the west. One of the things to keep in mind, though, is we are not allowed to put a traffic signal in. According to something called the Manual of Uniform Traffic Control Devices, it's a guide. Everything that we work under is a guide. There aren't any regulations for traffic, but there are generally accepted practices that as engineers we have to follow. And one of those is warrants for a traffic signal. And there's a number of ways you can get a warrant: excessive volumes, excessive turning movements, things like that. I don't think we would have enough volume on any of the cross streets leading up to High Street to allow us to put a signal in for that reason. There's other reasons that you could put a signal in, like a safety issue or something like that. But I think in this case, it would be pretty tough for us to put something out there without having, you know, some reason to do it.
Okay, then I'd push it back to Parker Station Road. And clearly that's an intersection. Clearly people are making left-hand turns. I just think that you need the ability for gaps in traffic, and that would definitely create some time for movements on Elm and High. And then the same thing, you need it in the PM, the folks coming from Manchester, you do need some of those gaps.
Yeah, I mean, maybe to address the second part of your question, if we put a signal at Pleasant Street, would it create gaps at High and Elm Street? Yeah, I mean, it would. Would it create enough of a gap to allow the traffic to move? I don't know. I guess the short answer is no. We didn't try to predict what a traffic signal at Pleasant would do to High and Elm. It probably wouldn't be that hard to do. You know, we could change a couple of things in the way we modeled High and Elm. My sense is that it would make some difference, but it wouldn't make enough difference. But I can't answer that question directly right now. You know, I can talk to Carl and Megan here, maybe we can work that into it somehow. But it's a good question, a reasonable question. Anyone else? Yeah, go ahead.
Thank you, Mike, for this presentation. My name is John Heichel. I'm from Goffstown. I'm also the chair of the planning board. I'm not speaking for the planning board in any way right now. I have been speaking to an awful lot of folks around here that go through Goffstown daily, the center, and one of the ideas, and I'm glad that it came up as to a one-way, two-lane going around through the town, leaving Mill, a two-way street, the SAU, which I don't remember the name of that street, but that's School Street, leave that a two-way street, Church Street two-way, Elm two-way, but basically coming across the bridge would be one lane, going across the bridge, which would merge into two lanes going in the same direction, left in front of Sully's on 114, and then somewhere, maybe past the mobile station where that street comes back into Church, somewhere between Sully's and the mobile station, but I just like that one, for instance, to bring that down to Depot Street. So you would have basically maybe a slightly larger Amoskeag circle that we all drive and we all don't have any problem merging and getting to where we have to go. And basically traffic patterns are, we all know how to do that. So I've just drawn a little thing, and I've also taken into consideration in back of Town Hall the land that is proposed to be given to the town. I know private developers who would be very interested in, and because that land is raw land at this time, it's a great time to do something right and do something very attractive, which would make a wonderful town common in that circle, in back of town hall. And I know that that could be very useful commercial property for shops and lights and trees and make it a real nice atmosphere inside of there. And I don't see any place on this diagram that we drew where traffic would actually be tied up. It would be right onto Elm, right onto 13, and coming off of 13 would be right onto 114 to continue around the circle. I'm sure you thought of it. That's why I spoke up if we'd be able to go to that meeting at DOT, because I know an awful lot of folks that have that interest. And I know moving traffic is one of the main concerns, but so is preserving the aesthetics of the Main Street area, not affecting businesses that operate in that area as well. But I think with some consideration, that's another very good possibility. The other thing is, the pavement's already down on most of it. So all you would really need to do is do a light coat if you wanted to make it all look black again, or just paint. So I think it's one of the simple solutions that's reasonably priced as well. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, I'm Robin Brady with the Goffstown Main Street program, and I'd like just to reflect that there are many studies out there that indicate that one-way traffic in downtowns, particularly historic downtowns, has been proven time after time to be detrimental not only to the businesses along that route, but also to pedestrian traffic. Because when you have one-way traffic in a two-lane setting such as Main Street would be, people tend to speed up instead of slowing traffic down and giving pedestrians a chance. People tend to go faster. And since our number one goal should always be safety, one-way traffic, again, study after study after study has shown not the best choice. There are many cities and towns across the country that are in the process of, at great expense, converting their one-way systems back into two-way. So it may sound like it's a good alternative, but I think if we look at the data from across the country, we'll see that it may not be the best solution for us.
Thank you.
Scott Gross. I am not a paid spokesperson for Sully's, but I am here representing the Lions Club, and one of the recommendation, I believe, was the traffic calming, the one, I'm not sure which diagram that it was, but it reconfigured the Sully's parking lot entrance, and that is adjacent to the Goffstown popcorn stand. I will say, from being at that popcorn stand on numerous weekends, I have a lot of reservations personally about one entrance in and out. I think it could be very chaotic, and I think it actually might even slow down or create a lot of problems in front of that particular intersection. I'm just expressing my opinions. I'm sure the folks from Sully's might want to interject as well, but again, from sitting at that popcorn stand for 3 and 6 hours at a time and watching the traffic flow there, I have grave reservations about what you have planned for that.
Yeah, thanks, Scott. I would just point to, this is whatever we do here, I'm more concerned about what we're doing here at the intersections. This, what we showed at Sully's was, we have not had discussions with them at this point. To me, that's a final design detail that we would try to work out to get something. One of the problems is if you leave this entrance in here, I mean, one of the things we actually showed, we thought about showing, but we took it off for tonight, it was actually just show a right in right here, just a directional drive. You could work out the design details. That's what we would do as we move forward. So, Is there anyone else that would like to speak? Okay.
Yeah, sorry.
You can go, yeah.
I just had a question about the proposed plan for Pleasant Street. The no-build, is there still a provision for a left-hand turn lane going out to Pleasant Street with a bypass on the right, or is it going to be funneled down into one lane?
Yes, it would still have the ability to make a left turn. Again, that's a little bit of a design detail. We've thought about, that maybe you would provide put a white line in there so that you would say, okay, these guys are going. It's hard to see on this drawing because we don't have dimensions. We did that kind of intentionally. The way we've drawn it right there is it's actually a wider one lane. So realistically, the way we have it drawn there, you could set 2 cars in there pretty easily. So somebody can bypass. If you get more than 1 or 2 cars that are queuing to cross, the southbound traffic, they could queue up and you could still bypass them on the right-hand side. So again, a design detail that we would work out, but yes, the idea would not be to just funnel it to one lane, although maybe from a safety aspect, the best thing we could do is narrow that up because that slows people down. I would also say that the lady was talking about the one way. I agree with you that you get 2 lanes, they're going in the same direction. One of the things I think that you would try to do if you went with a one-way alternative is you would look at doing things like bump outs, things like that, crosswalks that are very, noticeable, trying to get people to slow down through there. And that's something that you could, everything we do is a compromise. And so, we try to find the best solution. So, is there anybody that hasn't gone that would like to speak? David?
Thank you, Mike. Dave Pierce, live on Mill Street in the village. 2 comments. First, you looked at the single roundabout at the intersection of High, Mass, and Main, and you started with the premise that the parcel the library on is available. And then you said, could a proper size roundabout fit? Well, yes, you showed that it would. I'd like the design options to also look at the diagonal parcels across from the library. Were the 2 parcels, it's a 2-story resident and a 3-story commercial resident building, if those 2 parcels were available, would a proper size roundabout fit? And I maintain that should be one of the options that is documented in this study. The second comment, and I'll hand the mic back, on many of these where you have a stop line for traffic exiting Elm Street. The stop line is considerably away from the center of the road that they're merging into. And if people are faithful to where that stop line is, they have to wait for a longer gap of traffic to cross the traffic flow. And in peak hours, that longer gap is not available. My comment comes down to the fact that could the stop line be closer to the lane that they're, closer to the road that they're merging into?
Yeah, you're talking about like right here?
Yes.
Okay.
2 comments, thank you.
That's a question.
I just two more.
This is just for the record. I've heard people say, why wasn't the common touched at all? Was that just simply it doesn't work to put anything near the common? And then the other question or comment was with regard...
I'm going to forget.
Oh, okay.
Let me talk about this first. Yeah, one of the things that we wrestle with in terms of doing these traffic calming things and again, trying to keep things tight and so forth, is where the stop bars end up. We're trying to minimize the crosswalk. If you think about what's going on out here, this crosswalk basically goes on this big old angle here, and that's why it becomes, one of the reasons it becomes so long. We've shown it this way. In point of fact, the way people operate is they'll stop here and then they'll move forward and they'll go over that thing. Now, is that strictly following the laws of the road? Probably not. In essence, what would be nice is, well, roundabouts. One of the things about roundabouts is you'll notice the crosswalks are always back, and that's intentional. They're set back about 25 feet. The idea is that people come up and then they check to see if anybody's in the crosswalk, and then if there isn't, then they proceed and they yield, right here at the end of the island. In essence, I think this would operate somewhat similar, although we're not really allowed to show it that way. That's, in point of fact, I'm probably bending the rules there a little bit. You can see from back here, because this is clear. There'll be some kind of parked here, which can be an issue as well. Again, it's a compromise solution. Now, Scott.
There was the question about the common, and the reason why I say that is because I think Representative Heichel brought up a good point. There is in the works. Can you hear me?
No.
I was saying, Representative Heichel brought up a very good point. Looking in a vacuum and not knowing that there is a donation in the works of land behind Town Hall, a substantial donation of very good property. If we didn't have that, and that wasn't on the horizon, then certainly looking at taking part of the common might be viewed negatively. But as Representative Heichel said, and I happen to agree with him, I think we have to look at everything in its totality, and is it possible that if the common was used, that we could just simply relocate the common to maybe a much nicer common behind Town Hall? And then my other comment, again, which addresses what this woman had stated at Russ as well, is there are folks in Bernardville, I guess, who are very sensitive to the fact that a light does not reflect the village character. Because every time we turn around, we put another light, in Bernardville. And I'd also say that I've been at meetings where I've heard that when there was a discussion about putting utilities underground, well, there'd be a lot of historical photos with power lines, So it's like, I think you can't have your cake and eat it too. I think if safety is very important, and if a light does make sense, then maybe that's the route that we should go. We just shouldn't rule it out because it doesn't fit with the historical character.
Address the two parcels.
Yeah. Trying to move my head. All right. Well, I'll tell you what, Dave. I'll back up to yours. Let me just go to Scott's first. The committee never mentioned, impacting the common. So it never came up in the discussion. So I'll just say that for the record. From our standpoint, I wasn't crazy about going after the library, for one thing, because it's a historic building. I'd have the same concern about going into the common. You've got the statue there. There's definitely a historical nature to the common. We're going to have to wrestle. Anything we do down here has to, again, we're going before the historical resources. They basically have a monthly meeting. You bring your project to this committee, which is made up of historians and things, for the state, and they evaluate what you're doing. If we were to be able to relocate the library, make it better than it was, we create a roundabout, something that's park-like, so forth and so on, we felt like that was something that they could maybe deal with. If we go in here and we take this and reconfigure the common in totality or some other way, how would they view that? It's anyone's guess at this point. So, I think it never came up, so we didn't go there. We tried to stay away from it, for better or for worse. Maybe I'll go back to, did that answer both of yours?
Yeah.
Okay, I'll go back to what Dave was asking. One of the things we tried to do here is, and probably Brian could talk about this better than I could, but we tried to look at, okay, if we're going to do a roundabout, where's the best place to put it? And part of the problem in this area is the angle of the roadways and getting it to work. We took that circle and pushed it around any number of ways. And one of the things that we try to do on any project is we try to minimize impacts. Now, what does that mean? Well, you try to get the least footprint that you can get. And so we don't want to, impact anyone if we can. We did that with Wallace Road. We impacted, part of each property on each side, but we tried to minimize them. But we did push that around and made it smaller to try to stay away from, the worst impacts that we could have. In this case here, one of the other things we try to do, so you're trying to minimize impacts. Well, how do you do that? Do you put a little bit of impact on each property? Or do you say, okay, I'm just going to do a massive impact to one property, and maybe there's very small impacts to a couple others, and then I've got no impacts to these guys over here. The best place for the roundabout is probably some location where it impacts everyone there. And that doesn't make sense from the standpoint of we have to then deal with a number of entities. And it's always worse, the more people you get involved in it, the more chance you have that you'll run into some owner that just doesn't want to deal with you at all. And the town has had a reluctance in the past to go to what's called eminent domain when you have a really, for lack of a better term, an ornery owner. It's their property. Why should we affect it? I mean, you can talk about the public good and all that kind of thing, but in reality, what this town has done, and I commend them for it, is to try to get projects done with a minimum impact and trying to do it with what is known as a, I'm looking for the right word,
Amicable solution.
yeah, something like that. There's actually a right-of-way term for that, a willing seller, okay? And so that's what you try to do. Did we look at pulling this over? Yes, we did that. And we just felt like, we couldn't get the right solution once we pulled it over there and still stay off of the library. And so we felt like, okay, well, what if we shove it this way? And so we took the thing and, moved all over the place. So the best solution is actually one that gets everybody. Okay.
I just wanted to say that it seems a shame to be spending all this money on paperwork, because when Pinardville needs a traffic solution, we put up a light, okay? And we don't have to spend maybe $400,000 on paperwork. I mean, it's a simple solution. It works, okay? Everybody takes their turn. I stop, someone else goes. If there's a pedestrian that wants to cross, it can cross. Are we doing all this because we want to please the Historical Society? It doesn't make sense. That's all what I want to say. Thank you.
Maybe the people here misunderstood me when I said taking part of the comment. When I said that, I meant the bump out and maybe a few of the bricks along the edge, not a big chunk of the common. Just a foot or so to give a little more of a turning lane, get rid of the parking along in front of it, so you'd have a right-hand turn. I lost the parking on Elm Street in front of my house. I used to be parking on that side. We lost that years ago. So, there's parking at the laundromat, there's public parking there's public parking over at the SAU building. There's only 3 parking places there, so to eliminate those 3 places surely wouldn't hurt to take those away to make a turning lane, because to make a right-hand turn for traffic light at that intersection. That's all. Thank you.
Scott, any calls?
Thanks. I think, Scott, it was you who brought up the issue of does what we do at one intersection affect what happens at the other intersection? In other words, is there a cumulative effect? The committee certainly looked at that. And I believe, Mike, what we came up with, I may not have confirmed these numbers for me, there was a light to be installed basically at East and West Union Street. The queue, I believe, was somewhere around 38 or 40 cars in the AM peak hour.
Yeah, we had 33.
So if you can imagine 33 cars backed up from a light at East Union Street would go down the hill, across the bridge, onto Main Street, and any gap that may result that would quickly compress and would result in, which is why the committee chose what you call no-build, it's actually a build option, to allow that traffic to keep moving through town, keep it moving along so that you don't get those long backups. So I just wanted to address that comment about it.
Thank you again, John Michael again. I just might say that for what it's worth, Bangor has had a one-way loop around their downtown historic section for many years. So is Waterville. Portland, Congress Street is one-way. Dover has a wonderful historical downtown with a one-way traffic pattern around it. So it does work. The other thing I want to say is I'm not against roundabouts. I don't mind them at all in the right place. But I know that once the one was built at Wallace Road, and the first or second time that I was going to it, it took me about an hour to get through it because traffic was backed up to the ball fields. It has happened a few other times. I don't go through it that often, but I know that I have been backed up in traffic. And all I can think of is when I'm going through it is, that's the best solution that they came up with. It's built, and we're stuck in this traffic, and they're not. So whatever we do, one time we really should do it. Hopefully we really spend a lot of time deciding what's going to be best for this downtown traffic pattern and the preservation of the downtown itself. So thank you.
Cynthia Bowman, Main Street, I was on the committee. With regards to the common, it doesn't solve an intersection. It would solve one of them as the roundabout that was at the end of High Street. We were looking at the whole intersection, and therefore going back to the state and federal to expand it. Everything that we're talking about, we weren't able to do it because it was outside the limits of what we were looking at. That was the difficulty with the High Street, Elm Street intersection. So I think there's been a lot of very good comments here, and that is the whole thing, perhaps going back and looking further, because if we need to look a little more globally and locally with regards to what can we do and what can happen. With regards to the private homes, it's a heck of a lot easier to impact public buildings and public groups than it is privately held properties, especially structures.
One other comment about the common, and I don't know this for sure, but Mike, at the onset you showed a slide of historical structures that had been named back in the 1998 study. Since then, the national, there's been a nomination accepted for the National Historic District that has expanded the number of structures in that area that are eligible for the register. And so that also has to be taken into consideration on any of the federal projects. But the common itself, and I may be wrong on this, and so Dan and Dave don't believe that was deeded to the town for the express use as a common. And any changes to that would be, I think, something you'd have to look very, very carefully at.
Okay, well, I know it's getting a little late and probably all getting a little tired, so I think I'll close it up. I don't know that you need or want to say anymore. So I'd just like to say thank you to you all for coming out, and we really appreciate the input. And just, again, we do have a website. I don't know if you can put that back up there, Brian. Just flick to that last slide. We'll put this presentation on the website as a PDF. Yeah, and you know, all this stuff is there. You know, you can take a look at it and you know, print it out if you like as well. Try to make the PDFs as small as possible. So,
I did just want to take a minute, and I wanted to thank all the folks that have served on the steering committee, as well as the work that consultants have done. Because they really did go above and beyond the scope. And what I hope everybody has gained an appreciation of, because I do have thick skin, but for years I've heard, why aren't you doing something to fix the intersection? And I hope everybody at least has an appreciation to how difficult a problem it is to solve. There are a lot of moving parts. And I guess the one thought to leave everybody with is, the future does not make it any better. So if we don't deal with it today, hopefully I'll be retired, but at some point, folks will have to deal with it because the traffic's never going to get less on its own. So thank you all for coming out. I appreciate it, everybody.
thank you.